The old town of Havenwood, nestled in a quiet corner of America, was a place where time seemed to slow down, its rhythm dictated by the changing seasons rather than the frantic pace of the outside world. For Anya, returning after a decade away, it felt like stepping into a half-forgotten dream. The familiar scent of pine and damp earth, the smell of her childhood, hung in the air. A stark and welcome contrast to the acrid, metallic tang of dust and chaos that had been her world for so long. She had left as a girl, full of restless energy and a desperate need to prove herself. She returned as a woman, weary down to her bones, seeking the one thing she had sacrificed for so long, peace. She wore a simple gray hoodie, its fabric soft and worn, and a pair of faded jeans. Her long brown hair, once kept in a severe military bun, was pulled back in a loose, careless ponytail. There was nothing about her that would turn heads, no hint of the steel that lay beneath her quiet exterior. She was a ghost, haunting the edges of her own past, and that's exactly how she wanted it. She pushed open the door to the town's only diner. The pine cone and the bell above it announced her arrival with a cheerful, tinny jingle that hadn't changed in 10 years. A few heads turned, the usual collection of local farmers and shopkeepers, their curiosity piqued by a new face. They saw a stranger, nothing more, and quickly dismissed her. Returning to their hushed conversations about crop prices and town gossip, Anya slid into a booth by the window, the red vinyl of the seat cool and cracked against her skin. She was just another face in the crowd, anonymous and unseen. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the crushing weight of responsibility lifted from her shoulders, and she felt a fragile sense of peace. But that peace was as thin as glass, and it was about to shatter. A group of young men, their laughter loud and abrasive, swaggered into the diner, bringing a wave of expensive cologne and entitlement with them. They were the sons of the town's wealthiest families, boys who had been born on third base and thought they'd hit a triple. They piled into the booth directly behind her, their conversation a toxic mix of boasts, crude jokes, and casual cruelty. "Look, at this place," one of them, a man with slicked back, greasy hair named Kyle, said with a sneer that twisted his handsome features into something ugly. "Same old greasy spoon. You'd think they'd have renovated by now. It stinks of old people and regret." His friends, a chorus of sycophants, chuckled in agreement, their eyes scanning the room with a shared disdain for anything and anyone they deemed beneath them. Then, their collective gaze fell on Anya. Well, what do we have here?" Kyle said, his voice dripping with a thick, syrupy sarcasm. "Looks like we've got a visitor from the big city. Lost your way to the yoga studio, darling." Anya ignored them, her eyes fixed on the laminated menu, her heart beginning a slow, heavy drumbeat against her ribs. Her hands resting on the worn Formica tabletop, tightened into fists, her knuckles white. She had face-down armed insurgents, stared into the eyes of men who wanted her dead, but there was something about this casual, entitled mockery that grated on her nerves like sand in a wound. It was the arrogance, the complete lack of awareness of the world beyond their own privileged bubble. "Hey, I'm talking to you," Kyle said, his voice louder now, demanding attention. He leaned over the back of his booth, his face uncomfortably close to hers, his breath smelling of mint and self-satisfaction. "What's a girl like you doing in a place like this? Don't you have some organic, gluten-free vegan cafe to go to? Or did your trust fund finally run out?" His friends roared with laughter, a harsh braying sound that made the other patrons in the diner shift uncomfortably in their seats. Their eyes darted between Anya and the group of men, a silent, nervous energy filling the room. No one said a word. They all knew who Kyle Bishop was. They knew his father owned half the town and held the mortgages on the other half. They didn't want any trouble. Anya finally looked up, her gaze steady and unwavering, her eyes the color of a stormy sea. "I'm just here for a cup of coffee," she said, her voice surprisingly calm and even, a placid surface over a raging current. "A cup of coffee." Kyle scoffed, leaning back as if her simple request was the most ridiculous thing he had ever heard. "You come all the way to Havenwood for a cup of coffee? You must be really desperate." He looked her up and down, his eyes lingering on her simple, inexpensive clothes with theatrical disgust. "Or maybe you're just lost. Don't worry, sweetheart. I can be your knight in shining armor. I can help you find your way back to whatever rock you crawled out from under." The laughter from his friends was like a physical blow, and Anya could feel the anger, hot and sharp, rising within her. It was an old, familiar feeling, a fire she had learned to bank and control. But it was always there, just beneath the surface. She thought of the sacrifices she had made, the friends she had lost, the pieces of her soul she had left scattered across desolate, war-torn landscapes. All of it, for the very freedom that these pampered boys used as a weapon to belittle and humiliate. She had worn a uniform with pride, a symbol of her dedication and service. But now, in her civilian clothes, she was invisible, just another target for their casual cruelty. She took a deep, steadying breath, the way she had been trained to do. Before a mission, trying to control the storm raging inside her, she had been trained to handle high-pressure situations, to remain calm in the face of mortal danger. But this was a different kind of battle. This was a battle for her dignity, for her self-respect, for the memory of every soldier who had ever fought for something more than themselves. "I'm not lost," she said, her voice dropping, losing its placid quality and taking on a low, dangerous edge. "And I'm not your sweetheart." Kyle's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of surprise in his arrogant eyes. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by a woman in a faded hoodie. He leaned in closer again, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper, trying to reassert his dominance. "You've got a lot of nerve, talking to me like that," he hissed. "You don't know who I am, do you? I could buy and sell you 100 times over." "No," Anya replied, her eyes as cold as steel, her voice just as sharp. "But you're about to find out who I am." With a slow, deliberate movement, she stood up, her chair scraping harshly against the worn linoleum floor. The diner, which had been filled with a nervous murmur, fell completely silent. Every eye was on her. She was no longer the quiet, unassuming woman who had walked in just a few minutes ago. There was a fire in her eyes, a strength in her posture that radiated an undeniable authority. Kyle and his friends, for the first time, looked uncertain. Their smirks had vanished, replaced by a dawning unease. They had picked a fight with the wrong person, and they were about to learn a lesson they would never forget. The air in the diner crackled with a palpable tension, the silence so thick you could cut it with a knife. Everyone held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Anya stared Kyle down, her expression unreadable, a mask of deadly calm. What was she going to do? The whole town was watching, but they had no idea what she was capable of. They saw a woman in plain clothes, but they were about to see the soldier. The silence in the diner was a taut wire, humming with a nervous energy that vibrated through the room. Kyle, accustomed to being the one in control, the one who dictated the terms of every interaction, found himself profoundly unnerved by the woman standing before him. Her calm was more unsettling than any outburst would have been. It was the calm of a predator, patient and watchful. He tried to regain his footing, puffing out his chest and forcing a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Oh, I'm so scared," he sneered, his voice a little too high, a little too brittle. "What are you going to do?" "Complain to the manager. Write a bad review on Yelp." Anya didn't answer. Instead, she took a slow, deliberate step toward their booth. Her movements were fluid, economical, each one imbued with a sense of purpose that made the hairs on the back of Kyle's neck stand up. She wasn't just walking, she was advancing, claiming the space between them with an unspoken authority. "You know," she began, her voice still quiet but carrying to every corner of the silent room. A low, clear tone that commanded attention. "I've spent the last 10 years in places where a man's worth isn't measured by his father's bank account, or the car he drives, or the brand of his clothes." Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, flickered to each of Kyle's friends, who were now shrinking back in their seats, their earlier bravado evaporating under her intense, dissecting gaze. They looked like what they were, boys playing at being men. "I've seen real men," she continued, her voice hardening, each word a carefully placed stone. "Men who fight for something bigger than themselves. Men who would give their lives, and have given their lives, to protect the very freedoms you're using to act like a spoiled, petulant child in a greasy spoon diner." Kyle's face flushed a deep mottled red, a mixture of anger and acute public embarrassment. "You don't know anything about me," he sputtered, his voice cracking. "I know enough," Anya said, stopping directly in front of him. She was close enough now that he could see the faint, silvery scar that traced a delicate line just above her eyebrow, a detail he hadn't noticed before. It was a map of a life he couldn't possibly comprehend. "I know you've never had to work for anything in your life. I know you think you're entitled to disrespect anyone you see as beneath you. And I know you just made a very, very big mistake." Before Kyle could process her words, before he could even form a retort, Anya's hand shot out. It wasn't a punch or a slap, but something faster, more precise. A blur of motion. She grabbed his wrist, her fingers locking round it with a strength that was utterly shocking. A strength that seemed impossible for a woman of her size. Kyle yelped, a pathetic, high-pitched sound that was a stark contrast to his earlier bluster. "Go of me," he stammered, his eyes wide with panic as he tried to pull his arm away, but her grip was like a vice, unyielding and unbreakable. "You wanted to know who I am," Anya said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper that only he and his terrified friends could hear. "I'm the person who has learned to survive in places you can't even imagine. I'm the person who has looked true evil in the eye and didn't blink. And right now, I'm the person who is about to teach you a lesson in respect." With a sharp, almost imperceptible flick of her wrist, she applied a twisting pressure to a nerve cluster. It was a simple pain compliance technique, one designed to incapacitate without causing permanent injury, a move as natural to her as breathing. Kyle's knees buckled instantly, and he cried out in a spasm of pure, unadulterated pain, his face contorting in a grimace. His friends were frozen, their mouths agape, too stunned and too cowardly to intervene. The diner's owner, a portly balding man named Mr. Henderson, finally found his voice, snapping out of his stupor. "Hey now, that's enough. I don't want any trouble in here. I'm calling the sheriff." Anya released Kyle's wrist as suddenly as she had grabbed it. He stumbled back, cradling his arm as if it were a wounded bird, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear, pain, and disbelief. She hadn't even broken a sweat. She turned to Mr. Henderson, her expression softening slightly, the soldier receding and the quiet woman returning. "I apologize for the disturbance, sir. I'll be leaving now." She dropped a $10 bill on her table to cover the coffee she never got to drink and turned to walk away. The other patrons watched her go, a new dawning respect in their eyes. They had misjudged her, just as Kyle had. They had seen a mouse, but they had just witnessed a lioness as she reached the door. It swung open, and a man in a sheriff's uniform stepped inside, his hand resting on the handle of the door. It was Sheriff Brody, a man whose face was a roadmap of long years and small-town worries. He had known Anya since she was a little girl, a quiet, determined kid who always seemed to be looking for a way out of Havenwood. He took in the scene. At a glance, the tense, unnatural silence, Kyle and his friends looking shaken and pale, and Anya standing by the door, her back ramrod straight. "Anya," he said, his voice a mixture of surprise and deep concern. "What in the world is going on in here?" Kyle, seeing the sheriff, saw his chance for revenge, his chance to reclaim his shattered pride. "Sheriff, thank God you're here." He wind his voice, dripping with self-pity. "This woman, she assaulted me, for no reason. I want her arrested." Sheriff Brody looked from Kyle's whining, entitled face to Anya's calm, composed one. He had known the Bishop family for years and was well aware of their reputation for throwing their weight and their money around. He also remembered Anya, the girl who had enlisted the day after she graduated high school, seeking a structure and purpose that Havenwood could never offer. Something didn't add up. "Is that true, Anya?" the sheriff asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Did you assault this young man?" Anya met his gaze, her own unwavering. "He was harassing me, Sheriff. I defended myself." "She's lying," Kyle insisted, his voice rising hysterically. "She attacked me for no reason. Look at my wrist. I want to press charges." Sheriff Brody sighed, a long, weary sound, as he rubbed the back of his neck. This was the last thing he wanted to deal with on a quiet Tuesday morning. He was caught between the town's most influential family and a woman he had once respected, a woman who had just come back from a war zone, a place that changes people in ways he couldn't imagine. "All right, both of you," he said, his voice firm, taking charge. "I think you'd better come down to the station with me. We need to sort this out properly." Anya nodded once, her expression unreadable. Kyle, however, looked triumphant. He thought he had one. He believed that once they were at the station, a single phone call from his father would ensure that Anya was the one who was punished. As Sheriff Brody escorted them out of the diner, the patrons began to whisper amongst themselves, their voices a low hum. They had seen what happened, but would any of them be brave enough to speak up against Kyle Bishop? Just as they stepped onto the sun-drenched sidewalk, a sleek, menacingly black car with tinted windows pulled up to the curb with a silent, electric hum. The back window rolled down with a soft whir, and a man in a sharp, impeccably tailored suit leaned out. He had a stern, authoritative face and eyes that seemed to see and analyze everything at once. He looked directly at Anya, his expression unreadable. "Major," he said, his voice crisp, clear, and utterly out of place in the sleepy town. "We have a situation. You're needed." Sheriff Brody froze, his hand on the door of his dusty patrol car. He turned to look at Anya, his eyes wide with a profound, sputtering confusion. "Major, who was this man? And why in God's name was he calling the quiet girl from Havenwood Major?" The title hung in the air, a single word that was a question mark, a bombshell that changed everything. The title Major echoed in the sudden, profound stillness of the street, seeming to suck all the other sounds into a vacuum. Sheriff Brody's hand fell away from his patrol car door, as if it had been burned. He stared at Anya, his mind struggling to reconcile the quiet, bookish girl he remembered with the imposing woman standing before him, a woman who answered to a military rank he associated with high-level command. Kyle's smug expression dissolved into a mask of confusion. The man in the suit, his face an impassive slate of professionalism, opened the car door from the inside. "Major Jensen, we need to go," he said, his tone leaving no room for debate. "It's a matter of national security." Anya, or Major Jensen, as she was now undeniably known, gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The transformation was instantaneous. The quiet woman from the diner, the returning local, vanished completely. In her place stood a soldier, her posture straightening, her eyes sharpening with focus. She turned to the sheriff, her eyes conveying a silent apology for the trouble she had caused, and a promise she might not be able to keep. "Sheriff, I'm afraid I have to postpone our trip to the station." "But, what's going on?" Brody stammered, completely out of his depth. This was beyond dealing with local disputes or teenage troublemakers. "Who are you people?" But the man in the suit stepped out of the car. He was tall and imposing, and he moved with the kind of quiet, predatory confidence that spoke of immense power and a dangerous profession. He approached the sheriff, and without a word, presented a black leather wallet containing a single, stark white ID card. Brody's eyes, accustomed to reading driver's licenses and fishing permits, widened as he read the words, Department of Defense. This is a matter you don't need to be concerned with. Sheriff, the man said, his tone polite but as unyielding as steel. Major Jensen is under our jurisdiction now. Kyle, whose brain was slowly catching up to the rapidly changing situation, saw his opportunity for vindication slipping away. Emboldened by the presence of what he assumed was a higher, more important authority, he stepped forward. She assaulted me. You can't just let her go. I have rights. The man, who introduced himself as Agent Thorne, turned his cold analytical gaze on Kyle. It was like being examined by an entomologist. And you are? I'm Kyle Bishop. My father is Robert Bishop, he said, puffing out his chest and saying the name as if it were a magic word, a key that could unlock any door and solve any problem. Thorne's expression didn't change by a single flicker. I see. Well, Mr. Bishop, I would advise you to go home and think very carefully about the consequences of filing a false report against a decorated officer of the United States Army. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in, each one a drop of ice water. We take threats against our personnel, whether foreign or domestic, very seriously. Kyle paled, the last of his bluster deflating like a punctured tire. He looked from Thorne's granite-like face to Anya's, and, for the first time, a flicker of genuine, primal fear entered his eyes. He had stumbled out of his shallow pond and into a deep, dark ocean, a world with rules and consequences far beyond his privileged experience. Without another word, Thorne gestured for Anya to get into the car. She gave Sheriff Brody one last look, a silent promise to explain when she could, and then slipped into the back seat. The door closed with a solid, definitive thud, and the black car pulled away from the curb, leaving a stunned sheriff and a terrified Kyle standing on the sidewalk, enveloped in a cloud of dust and confusion. Inside the car, the silence was heavy, thick with unspoken questions. Anya stared out the window as the familiar streets of Havenwood blurred past. It had been less than 24 hours since she had returned, and already, her past was catching up with her, its long shadow eclipsing her hopes for a quiet life. I'm sorry about that, Major, Thorne said, breaking the silence. We tried to give you more time, but the situation has escalated beyond our control. What is it? Anya asked, her voice all business now, crisp and efficient. It's about the asset you secured in Kandahar, Thorne explained, his voice low and grave. The one we codenamed Prometheus. It's been compromised. Anya's blood ran cold. Prometheus wasn't a what, it was a who. It was Dr. Eris Thorne, a brilliant but dangerously unstable biochemist who had been working on a weaponized, airborne virus for a well-funded terrorist cell. Anya's Special Forces team had been sent in to extract him and his research. A brutal, bloody mission that had cost them dearly. 2 of her men, good men, had died getting him out. Compromised how? She asked, her voice tight with a dreadful premonition. He's gone, Thorne said grimly. Vanished from the safe house in Virginia 2 days ago. We have reason to believe he's not working alone. He's had help, sophisticated help, in his trail. It leads here. Anya's head snapped around to face him, her eyes wide with disbelief. Here, to Havenwood. That's impossible. It's a ghost town. We didn't believe it either, Thorne admitted, handing her a tablet. But the intelligence is solid. He has a contact in this area, someone with the resources to help him disappear, set up a new lab, and continue his work. We think he's planning to sell the virus to the highest bidder on the black market, and he's using your quiet little hometown as his base of operations. The news was a gut punch. The chaos and danger she had tried so hard to leave behind had followed her, home, to the one place in the world she thought was safe. The irony was a bitter, metallic taste in her mouth. She had come back to Havenwood to escape the war, only to find that the war had come back for her. Why me? She asked, though she already knew the answer. You're the only one who can positively identify him on sight, Thorne said. And more importantly, you're the one who got inside his head during the debriefing. He has a twisted respect for you. He might even try to reach out. The car sped on, leaving the small town behind and heading towards a temporary command post they had set up in the dense, dark woods. Anya's mind was racing, processing tactical scenarios and threat assessments. Dr. Thorne was a monster, a man who would gladly watch the world burn for the right price. And now he was here, in her town, a ticking time bomb that could devastate not just Havenwood, but the entire country. The weight of her responsibility, an old and familiar burden, settled on her shoulders. She was a soldier, and this was her mission. She had to find Thorne before he could unleash his deadly creation. As they arrived at the command post, a makeshift camp of tents and satellite dishes hidden deep within the forest, Thorne showed her a satellite image of Havenwood on the tablet, with several locations circled in red. These are the potential locations where Thorne could be hiding, he explained. They're all secluded, with access to power and water, and they're all properties that have been recently purchased through shell corporations. We need you to scout them, see if you can find any sign of him. Anya studied the map, her eyes narrowing. One of the locations was an old abandoned lumber mill on the outskirts of town. It was a place she knew well, a place haunted by childhood memories. She and her friends used to play there as kids, daring each other to explore its dark, cavernous interior. I'll start here, she said, pointing to the mill. Thorne nodded. Good. We'll provide overwatch, but you'll be on your own on the ground. We can't risk a full-scale operation until we have a confirmed location. We go in heavy. We risk him releasing the virus as a dead man's switch. Anya geared up, swapping her civilian clothes for tactical gear. The familiar weight of the body armor and the cold, reassuring steel of her weapon were strangely comforting. This was her world, the one she understood. As night fell, a deep, moonless, dark. She approached the old mill, moving through the trees like a ghost. The place was even more dilapidated than she remembered, its windows like vacant eyes staring out into the darkness. A single, weak light flickered in one of the upper-story windows. A beacon in the otherwise pitch-black structure. Someone was inside. She slipped through a break in the rusted chain-link fence, her senses on high alert. The air was thick with the smell of rotting wood, damp earth, and something else, something chemical. She moved silently towards the main building, her weapon raised, every nerve ending tingling with anticipation. She found a side entrance, the door slightly ajar. She pushed it open and slipped inside, the darkness enveloping her like a shroud. She could hear a faint humming sound coming from above, the sound of machinery and low, muffled voices. She made her way up a rickety set of metal stairs, her footsteps silent on the creaking wood. The light was coming from a room at the end of a long, dusty hallway. As she got closer, she could hear the voices more clearly. She flattened herself against the wall, inching her way towards the door, which was slightly ajar. She peered through the crack, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Inside, she saw Dr. Thorne. He was hunched over a makeshift lab, his gaunt face illuminated by the eerie green glow of a computer screen. But he wasn't alone. Standing next to him, his face a mask of cold, calculating ambition, was a man Anya never ever expected to see again. A man she thought was dead. A man she had seen die. Her breath caught in her throat, a sharp, involuntary gasp she couldn't suppress. The man turned, his head snapping towards the sound, his eyes locking onto the crack in the door, locking directly onto hers. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. It was Sergeant Miller, one of the men who had been on the mission to extract Thorne, one of the men she had reported as killed in action, and he was holding a small, wireless detonator, his thumb hovering over the red button. The sight of Sergeant Miller, alive and standing next to the very man he was supposed to have died fighting, sent a shockwave through Anya that was more powerful than any physical blow. Her mind reeled, short-circuiting, trying to process the impossible reality. Miller, the man she had mourned, the man whose grieving wife she had written a long, difficult letter to, was a traitor. The entire mission, the firefight, the deaths of her other men, it had all been a lie, a carefully orchestrated piece of theater. Miller's smile was a venomous, triumphant thing. He raised the detonator slightly, a clear, unspoken threat. Major Jensen, he said, his voice laced with a triumphant mockery that scraped against her raw nerves. I knew you'd come. You always were predictable. Always had to be the hero. Anya's training, a decade of it, kicked in, a firewall against the flood of betrayal and confusion. She didn't move. She didn't speak. Her eyes, cold and assessing, darted around the room, taking in every detail. Dr. Thorne looked up from his work, a flicker of detached scientific amusement in his cold eyes. The makeshift lab was a chaotic mess of wires, beakers, and sophisticated computer equipment, all powered by a humming generator. In the center of it all was a reinforced, climate-controlled container. The virus, she presumed, and the room was rigged. She could see the telltale signs of C4 explosives placed at strategic, structural points. Miller wasn't just holding a detonator. He was holding the entire building, and everyone in it, hostage. What is this, Miller? She asked, her voice dangerously low, a coiled spring of fury. What have you done? It's called a promotion. Major Miller sneered, his face alight with a greedy, resentful glee. I got tired of taking orders from people like you, risking my life for a country that doesn't give a damn about us when we get home. Dr. Thorne here offered me a much better deal, a partnership. My skills, his brains, you sold us out, Anya said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. You let our men die. You let Davis and Chen die. They were acceptable losses, Miller said with a chilling, sociopathic lack of remorse. A small price to pay for a lifetime of wealth and freedom. You of all people should understand that, Major, the greater good. And all that, except this time, the greater good is me. The rage that had been simmering inside Anya since the diner now threatened to boil over into a white-hot inferno. This wasn't just about a mission anymore. This was personal. This was about the men she had lost. The trust she had placed in a man who was now her enemy. A ghost who had come back to haunt her. She had to get them out of that room, away from the explosives. She had to separate them. So what's the plan, Miller? She asked, forcing a calmness she didn't feel. Playing for time. Blow us all to kingdom come. You won't get very far if you're a pile of ashes. Your buyer won't be too happy about that. Oh, I'm not going to blow us up, Miller said with a smug chuckle. Not yet. Anyway, this is just a little insurance policy, in case your friends outside get any heroic ideas. He nodded towards the window, indicating Agent Thorne's Overwatch team. No, We have a different exit strategy. But first, we have a little business. To conclude, he turned to Dr. Thorne. The buyer is on his way. Is the package ready for transport? Dr. Thorne, who had been watching their exchange with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing rats in a maze, nodded. The virus is stable and ready for transport. The initial dose is potent enough to wipe out a city the size of Chicago in less than 72 hours, a truly elegant piece of work. The casual, prideful way he spoke about such apocalyptic devastation sent a fresh wave of horror through Anya. She had to stop this. She had to do it now. She took a small, calculated step back, her hand slowly, almost imperceptibly, moving towards the tactical knife strapped to her thigh. It was a risky move, a desperate gamble, but it was the only one she had. Miller's eyes narrowed. He hadn't missed the movement. Don't even think about it, Major. I know all your moves. Remember, I trained with you. I know you favor the CQC takedown. I know you'll go for the weapon hand first. I know everything about you. He was right. He knew her tactics, her strengths, her weaknesses, but he didn't know everything. He didn't know the woman she had become in the years since he had died. He didn't know the depths of her resolve, the cold, hard place she could go to when lives were on the line. She needed a distraction, something to break his focus for just a split second. Her eyes scanned the hallway, searching for anything she could use. Her gaze landed on a rusty, old-fashioned fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. It was ancient, but it might just work. You're a fool, Miller, she said, her voice filled with a contempt that was only half feigned. You think you can trust him? She nodded towards Thorne. He's a psychopath. He sees people as lab rats. The second you're no longer useful to him, he'll put you in a cage, or a grave. Miller hesitated, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. He knew she was right. He had seen what Thorne was capable of, the cold, casual cruelty he inflicted on his test subjects. It was the opening she needed. In one fluid, explosive motion, she lunged for the fire extinguisher, ripped it from its mounting, and pulled the pin. She aimed the nozzle at the doorway and squeezed the handle, unleashing a thick, choking cloud of white foam into the room. Chaos erupted. Miller shouted in surprise and rage, his vision completely obscured. Dr. Thorne cursed, stumbling back and trying to shield his precious equipment from the chemical spray. Anya didn't wait. She charged into the room, a ghost in the swirling white cloud. She used the chaos to her advantage. The element of surprise, her only ally. She crashed into Miller, driving her shoulder hard into his chest. He stumbled back, caught off balance. The detonator flying from his hand, it skittered across the concrete floor, coming to a stop just inches from a pool of spilled unknown chemicals. Anya and Miller were a tangle of limbs, a whirlwind of violence. Their training made them evenly matched. He was stronger, but she was faster, more agile. She rained a series of blows on him, each one precise and calculated, aimed at his weak points. The throat, the ribs, the knees. Dr. Thorne, seeing his meticulously planned operation falling apart, made a run for the virus container. He was a scientist, not a soldier, and his only instinct was to protect his creation, his masterpiece of death. Anya saw him out of the corner of her eye. She couldn't let him escape. With a final desperate burst of energy, she kicked out, sweeping Miller's legs from under him. He went down hard, his head hitting the concrete floor with a sickening, wet thud. She didn't have time to see if he was conscious. She scrambled for the detonator, her fingers closing around the cool plastic just as Thorne reached the virus. It's over, Thorne, she yelled, her voice hoarse from the foam and the exertion. Give it up. Thorne turned, his face a mask of pure, intellectual fury. It's never over, Major. You can't stop progress. You can't stop the future. He lunged at her, not with his fists, but with a syringe he had plucked from his lab table. The needle glinted in the dim, flickering light, filled with a clear, viscous liquid. Anya dodged, but he was surprisingly quick for a man who spent his life in a lab. The needle grazed her arm, tearing through the fabric of her sleeve and pricking her skin. She cried out, a sharp, burning pain spreading through her arm like liquid fire. She stumbled back, her vision blurring at the edges, the room tilting on its axis. What was in that syringe? Was it the virus? Was it poison? Thorne smiled, a triumphant, chillingly evil expression on his face. You should have stayed in your quiet little town, Major. Now you're going to be a part of my greatest experiment. A field test of one. Anya's legs gave out, and she collapsed to the floor, the detonator still clutched in her hand. The world was spinning, the sounds of the room fading into a dull, underwater roar. The last thing she saw before she lost consciousness was Miller beginning to stir, a dark, vengeful look in his eyes, and Thorne standing over her, the empty syringe in his hand, a look of pure, unadulterated evil on his face. Her hand was still on the detonator, her finger resting on the button. Was it a bluff, or was the whole place about to go up in flames, taking her with it? The darkness that enveloped Anya was thick and suffocating, a black, syrupy void, but it was not the end. Through the fog of unconsciousness, a single, insistent thought pierced through, a mantra drilled into her very soul. Fight. It was a command, ingrained in her by years of brutal training, forged in the crucible of 100 battles. Her eyelids fluttered, heavy as lead shutters. The world swam back into focus, a blurry, distorted version of the chaotic lab. The burning in her arm was a raging fire, spreading through her veins, making her limbs feel both numb and excruciatingly painful. Her head throbbed in a sickening rhythm with her frantic heartbeat. She could hear voices, distant and muffled, as if they were coming from the other side of a thick wall. "Get her out of here. The buyer will be here any minute, and he doesn't like loose ends." It was Miller's voice, rough and angry, thick with pain from their fight. "She could be useful," Thorne replied, his tone infuriatingly clinical and detached. "The substance I injected her with isn't the virus. It's a powerful paralytic agent, a prototype of my own design. It shouldn't have knocked her out completely. Her resilience is fascinating. Her body is fighting it. I'd like to study her further." "We don't have time for your pet projects," Miller snarled. "I'm not leaving a decorated Special Forces major as a witness. Load the virus into the truck. I'll deal with her. Permanently." Anya forced her muscles to obey. Her fingers still wrapped around the detonator, twitched. She had to move, had to do something before they realized she was conscious. She risked opening her eyes a fraction, her vision slowly clearing. Miller was standing over her, a length of thick rope in his hands. Thorne was carefully placing the virus container into a heavily padded, shock-proof transport case. The paralytic agent was making her limbs feel like they were filled with wet sand, but her mind was sharp, honed by years of fighting through pain and exhaustion. She knew she had only one chance, one moment to act before it was too late. As Miller bent down, his face a mask of grim determination, intending to tie her hands, she exploded into action. With a surge of pure, primal adrenaline that defied the drug in her system, she drove her knee up and into his groin with all the force she could muster. He gasped, a strangled, wheezing sound, and doubled over in pain, his face a mask of shock and agony. Anya scrambled away, her movements clumsy and uncoordinated, like a newborn foal. She tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't support her. She was a soldier without her strength, a warrior without her weapons. All she had was the detonator in her hand and the unquenchable fire in her heart. "Eat Miller!" roared, recovering faster than she had expected, his rage overriding his pain. He lunged for her, his face contorted with a murderous fury. Anya held up the detonator, her thumb pressing down hard on the button. "Stay back," she yelled, her voice trembling with a mixture of weakness and defiance. "I'll do it, Miller. I swear to God, I'll blow us all to hell." He froze mid-lunge, his eyes fixed on the device in her hand. He didn't know if she was bluffing, and in her current state, he couldn't be sure she wouldn't do it out of sheer, desperate spite. "You're insane," he breathed, taking a cautious step back. "You made me this way," she shot back, her voice a raw, ragged whisper. The standoff was a fragile one, a delicate balance of power that could shatter at any moment. It was then that Thorne, the ever-practical scientist, made his move. He had finished securing the virus and was now moving towards a side door, a small, satisfied smile on his face. He was abandoning Miller, leaving him to deal with the mess while he escaped with the prize. "Thorne, you coward!" Miller screamed, his attention diverted for a fatal second. It was all Anya needed. She threw the detonator at him, not as a weapon, but as a distraction. As he instinctively flinched and batted it away, she launched herself forward, not at him, but at the lab table. Her hand closed around the leg of a heavy steel stool. With a guttural cry that tore from her throat, she swung it, putting every last ounce of her failing strength into the blow. It connected with Miller's side with a sickening crack of bone, and he went down with a grunt of pain, his leg twisting at an unnatural angle. Anya didn't waste a second. She staggered towards the door Thorne had disappeared through, her body screaming in protest with every step. She burst out into the cool, damp night air, just in time to see the taillights of a large, unmarked truck disappearing down a muddy, overgrown dirt road. They were getting away with the virus. She collapsed to her knees in the mud, the paralytic agent finally winning the battle for control of her body. She was helpless, defeated. She had failed. But then, she heard another sound, a sound that cut through the chirping of the crickets. The sound of approaching vehicles, their powerful engines roaring, their headlights cutting bright, sweeping arcs through the darkness. It was Agent Thorne's Overwatch team, finally moving in. Agent Thorne himself was the first one to reach her. He knelt beside her in the mud, his usually impassive face a mixture of concern and grim determination. "Major, are you all right? What happened?" "He's gone," she whispered, her voice barely audible, her throat raw. "Thorne and the virus, in a truck." Agent Thorne spoke urgently into his radio, his voice calm and authoritative. "Prometheus is in the wind, heading east on Route 7, in a blue, unmarked transport truck. All units, converge. I want roadblocks on every road, every highway, every dirt track in a 100-mile radius. I want that truck found, now." He then turned his attention back to Anya. A medic was already at her side, cutting away her sleeve and assessing the angry red injection site on her arm. "What did he inject you with?" Thorne asked, his voice tight. "A paralytic?" She managed to say a prototype. The medic's face went pale. "We need to get her to a hospital immediately. We don't know what a prototype of Thorne's work could do. There's no known antidote, As they carefully lifted her onto a stretcher, Anya's mind was a whirlwind of fear and frustration. She had let them get away. The virus was out there, a plague in a box, waiting to be unleashed. And it was all her fault. But as they carried her towards a waiting ambulance, its lights painting the trees in strobing flashes of red and blue, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Sheriff Brody was there, standing at the edge of the police cordon that was forming around the mill, and he wasn't alone. Standing next to him, his expensive suit looking utterly out of place, his face a mask of cold, calculating ambition, was Kyle's father, Robert Bishop. He was one of the most powerful and respected men in the state, a philanthropist, a pillar of the community, and he was looking directly at the spot where the truck's taillights had disappeared into the darkness. A look of grim, predatory satisfaction on his face. Anya's heart stopped. The buyer, the contact with the resources to help Thorne disappear, it couldn't be but the look on his face, the timing, the sheer, breathtaking audacity of it. It all clicked into place with a sickening finality. She tried to speak, to scream, to warn them, but the words wouldn't come. Her body was betraying her, the darkness closing in again, pulling her under. The last thing she saw was Robert Bishop turning his head, his cold, empty eyes meeting hers for a fleeting, terrible second. And in that second, she saw the truth. He wasn't just a contact, he was the buyer, and he had just seen the only person in the world who could identify him. He knew she knew. The game had just changed, and she was now not just a soldier, but a target. The ride to the hospital was a frantic, jarring blur of flashing lights and urgent, disembodied voices. Anya drifted in and out of consciousness, her body a battlefield where her own formidable resilience waged a desperate war against Thorne's insidious poison. Each time she surfaced from the murky depths, the image of Robert Bishop's face, illuminated by the flashing ambulance lights, burned itself deeper into her mind. It was a revelation that shifted the entire landscape of the conflict. This wasn't a foreign threat that had invaded her hometown. It was a rot, a cancer, that had been festering from within 4 years. She awoke in a sterile white room, the air smelling of antiseptic and bleach. N for drip was taped to her arm, feeding a steady stream of antidote into her veins. The steady rhythmic beep of a heart monitor was her only companion. Agent Thorne was there, sitting in a hard plastic chair by her bed, his face etched with worry and exhaustion. "Welcome back, Major," he said, his voice softer and more human than she'd ever heard it. "You gave us quite a scare. The doctors said they've never seen anyone fight off a neurotoxin like that." "The truck?" she asked, her voice raspy, her throat feeling like it was lined with sandpaper. "Did you get it?" Thorne's expression darkened, and he shook his head, a look of deep frustration on his face. "It vanished. We had roadblocks on every major highway within a 100-mile radius. We had drones in the air. It's like it disappeared into thin air. They had a sophisticated escape plan, complete with a decoy vehicle and blocked satellite signals. This was a professional operation." "It was Bishop." Anya said, the words coming out with a newfound strength, fueled by a cold hard certainty. "Robert Bishop. He's the buyer." Thorne's eyes widened. He stood up and began to pace the small room. "The philanthropist. The man who is on a first-name basis with half of Congress. Are you absolutely sure?" "I saw his face," she insisted, pushing herself up in the bed, ignoring the sharp protest of her muscles. "He was there, at the mill. He saw me. He knows I can identify him." The implications of her words hung heavy and poisonous in the air. They weren't just fighting a rogue scientist and a traitorous soldier anymore. They were up against a man with immense power, influence, and a seemingly endless supply of resources. A man who could make a truck carrying a bioweapon disappear without a trace. "This changes everything," Thorne said, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "We can't move against a man like Bishop without concrete, irrefutable proof. He'll bury us in lawyers, launch a media campaign against us, and have us both reassigned to a weather station in Antarctica. The proof is in that truck," Anya said, her eyes blazing with a fierce intensity. "We have to find it." "My teams are working on it," Thorne assured her. "We're analyzing satellite imagery, tracking financial records, leaning on informants. But you need to rest. You're in no condition to—" "I'm the only one who can stop them," she interrupted, her voice ringing with an iron conviction. "Thorne and Miller know my tactics, but Bishop doesn't. He thinks I'm just a soldier. He thinks he's neutralized me. He doesn't know what I'm capable of." Before Thorne could argue, her hospital room door opened, and Sheriff Brody walked in. He looked tired and older than he had just a day ago, the weight of his town's dark secret pressing down on him. "Anya," he said, his voice heavy with a profound apology. I don't know what to say. I should have listened to you. At the diner. I let the Bishop name, the Bishop money, cloud my judgment for years." "It's not your fault, Sheriff," Anya said, her voice softening. "He's fooled a lot of people for a long time." "I came to tell you something," Brody continued, his gaze shifting to Agent Thorne, a new hard-won resolve in his eyes. "After you were taken to the hospital, I went back to the diner. I talked to Mr. Henderson and the other patrons. They all told me the same story. Kyle Bishop instigated the whole thing. He threatened and harassed you." He paused, taking a deep breath. "So, I did my job. the job I should have been doing all along. I went to the Bishop estate to arrest Kyle for harassment and for filing a false report. Anya and Thorne exchanged a look. This was an unexpected development. What happened? Thorne asked, his voice sharp with interest. Robert Bishop met me at the door, Brody said, his voice grim. He was calm. Too calm. It was chilling. He said Kyle had been sent away to a special school in Europe. He said the boy needed discipline. Then he handed me a check for $10,000, a donation to the police benevolent fund. He told me to forget the whole thing, that it was just a boyish misunderstanding. He's covering his tracks, Anya said, getting Kyle out of the country so he can't be questioned, and trying to buy your silence. But he made a mistake, Brody said, a new fire in his eyes. He underestimated me. He thought I was just another one of his paid-off flunkies, but I'm not for sale. He looked directly at Anya, and I think I know where he's holding the virus. Anya's heart leaped. Where? There's an old Bishop family property, a hunting lodge deep in the mountains, Brody explained. It's been abandoned for years, but I've heard whispers that Bishop has been renovating it, turning it into some kind of high-tech off-the-grid facility. It's the perfect place to hide something you don't want found. This was it, the final piece of the puzzle. We have to go now, Anya said, swinging her legs out of the bed, her bare feet hitting the cold tile floor. You're not going anywhere, Major, Thorne said, his voice firm. You're a target. Bishop knows you can identify him. It's too dangerous. That's exactly why I have to go, she countered, her voice low and steady. He'll be expecting a tactical team, a full-scale assault. He won't be expecting a small-town sheriff and a woman he thinks is half-dead in a hospital bed. We have the element of surprise. Thorne looked from Anya's determined face to Brody's resolute one. He knew she was right. A full-scale assault was what Bishop would be prepared for. A small covert operation was their only chance. All right, he conceded with a sigh. But you're not going in alone. I'm coming with you. The three of them, an unlikely alliance of a decorated soldier, a federal agent, and a sheriff, left the hospital and headed for the mountains. As they drove, Brody filled them in on the layout of the lodge, his local knowledge proving invaluable. They arrived at the property as the sun was beginning to set, casting long, ominous shadows through the trees. The lodge was a fortress, surrounded by a high-tech fence and monitored by a web of security cameras. There's a service entrance around the back, Brody whispered, pointing to a spot on a hand-drawn map. It's the only way in. Without tripping the main alarms, they moved through the woods like wraiths, their movements silent and precise. They found the service entrance, and Thorne, with his array of sophisticated gadgets, quickly disabled the electronic lock. They slipped inside, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic and ozone. The interior of the lodge was a stark, shocking contrast to its rustic exterior. It was a state-of-the-art laboratory, even more sophisticated than the one at the mill dot, and in the center of the main room, they saw it, the virus, housed in a new, larger containment unit, clearly being prepped for transport. Standing beside it was Robert Bishop, talking on a satellite phone, his back to them. The transaction is complete, he was saying, his voice smooth and confident. The product will be delivered to the specified coordinates within the hour. No, there will be no complications. The only person who could identify me has been neutralized. He turned, a self-satisfied smile on his face, and his eyes fell on Anya. His face, for the first time, registered shock, then a cold, murderous fury. You, he hissed, his composure shattering. Before he could react, Anya was moving. She was no longer the weakened patient from the hospital. She was a soldier in her element, her body and mind in perfect, deadly sync. The final confrontation was swift and brutal. Bishop was no soldier, but he was a man driven by greed and a lust for power. He fought with a desperate corner-drat ferocity, but he was no match for Anya. She disarmed him with a series of precise, debilitating blows, her movements a blur of controlled violence. He collapsed to the floor, defeated and broken, a pathetic figure in his expensive suit, as Sheriff Brody slapped the cuffs on him. The full weight of what had just happened settled on Anya. She had faced down the demons of her past and the monsters of her present. She had protected her home, not with the might of the army, but with the strength of her own convictions. The aftermath was a whirlwind of activity. Federal agents swarmed a lodge, securing the virus and arresting bishops. Co-conspirators, including a captured and very bitter Sergeant Miller, the story of the decorated war hero who had single-handedly saved her town from a terrorist plot, became a national sensation. A few days later, Anya was back at the diner. This time, the atmosphere was different. The patrons, who had once looked at her with suspicion, now greeted her with smiles and nods of respect. Mr. Henderson refused to let her pay for her coffee. She was sitting in the same booth by the window. When the bell above the door jingled, it was Kyle Bishop. He looked smaller, diminished, the arrogance and entitlement stripped away from him, leaving behind a lost and broken young man. He walked over to her table, his eyes downcast. I wanted to apologize, he mumbled, his voice barely audible. For what I said, for what I did. I was a fool. Anya looked at him, not with anger, but with a flicker of pity. Yes, you were, she said simply. My father. I know, Anya said. He's going to prison for a very, very long time. Kyle nodded, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. I guess I'm on my own now. Anya took a sip of her coffee, her gaze drifting out the window to the quiet, peaceful streets of heaven. She had come back looking for peace, and instead, she had found a war. But in fighting it, she had found something more. She had found her place. No, you're not, she said, turning back to him. You're in Happenwood, and here, we take care of our own, but you have to earn it. You have to prove that you're more than just your father's son. It was a new beginning, for both of them. Anya, the decorated war hero, had finally found a home. And in the quiet town of Heavenwood, she had discovered that the toughest battles are not always fought on foreign soil, but in the hearts and minds of the people you come back to. She had been mocked for her simple clothes, but now, they saw her for who she truly was, a hero, not just of a distant war, but of their own town. And that was a title she would wear with more pride than any medal.